The boy sat in the courtroom with his small hands folded neatly on the table. His feet didn't even touch the floor. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and every eye in the room was locked on him. He was only 12 years old, a child, but the world saw him as a monster. When the judge read out the words, "charged with murder," the boy looked up and smiled. Not a nervous smile, a confident one. As if he believed this was all just a game he could win. The courtroom froze. That smile sent chills down everyone's spine. It was the smile of a boy who thought he'd walk free. 2 months earlier, in a quiet town outside Chicago, life had been simple. Kids played basketball on the cracked sidewalks, parents mowed lawns, and the ice cream truck rolled through every evening. Among those kids was 12-year-old Evan Brooks, small for his age, always wearing the same red hoodie. Neighbors thought he was shy, polite even. No one knew that behind those quiet eyes was a storm waiting to break. Evan didn't have an easy life. His father had left when he was 5, and his mother worked long hours at a diner. Most nights, Evan ate cold cereal and watched crime shows alone. He loved how the detectives always found clues, how the criminals always thought they were smarter than the police. Sometimes, he'd whisper the lines before the TV characters said them. He wasn't like other kids, he didn't just watch, he studied. At school, he was often bullied. The other kids teased him for his small size, calling him names that made him clench his fists until his nails dug into his palms. One of the bullies was a bigger boy named Tommy Green, who enjoyed knocking Evan's books onto the floor just to watch him pick them up. Teachers said, "Boys will be boys," but Evan never forgot. It was around that time Evan met Mason, a 13-year-old who had already been suspended twice. Mason liked dangerous things, knives, fire, breaking rules. The two boys quickly became inseparable. Mason was everything Evan wasn't, loud, fearless, and cruel. Together, they started skipping school, stealing candy from stores, and sneaking into abandoned houses at night. Each time, Evan felt the rush, the feeling of control he never had before. Then, one gray Saturday afternoon, something happened that changed everything. A little boy named Eli Turner, just 3 years old, wandered away from his mother at a shopping plaza. Security cameras later showed Evan and Mason walking right behind him. The footage would later horrify the entire country. But that day, no one noticed two boys leading a toddler out a side door. Evan had told Mason they were just going to scare the kid a little. He said it like it was a joke, but deep down, he wanted to feel powerful, to be the one in control for once. They led Eli down a narrow path behind the stores, toward the riverbank, where no one could see them. Mason laughed and kicked at the dirt, while Eli started to cry, asking for his mom. Evan told him to be quiet. The more the little boy cried, the angrier he got. When the police found Eli's body hours later, the whole town fell silent. No one could believe that two children had done something so awful. The streets were filled with fear and disbelief. Parents clutched their kids tighter, and schools canceled classes for days. The police said the evidence pointed to 2 young suspects. But the names weren't released, they were too young. At the police station, Evan sat calmly as officers questioned him. He didn't cry. He didn't even flinch. He said Mason had done everything and that he just watched. But detectives weren't convinced. They had video, footprints, and something chilling, drawings Evan made in his notebook that showed 2 boys standing over a smaller figure. When they asked him why he drew it, he said softly, "Because that's what happened." And now, in that crowded courtroom, everyone waited to see if this 12-year-old boy would show any sign of guilt. Instead, Evan leaned back, smiled again, and whispered something to his lawyer, something no one could hear. His mother sobbed quietly behind him, her face buried in her hands. The judge's gavel struck the wood, echoing through the room like a gunshot. The trial had only begun, but something about that boy's smile made everyone realize, this was no ordinary child. The courtroom was silent except for the scribbling of pens and the soft hum of cameras. Evan's lawyer leaned close to him, whispering something meant only for his ears. But Evan didn't seem to listen. He stared straight ahead at the jury with that same cold, curious smile. Then he whispered back, words that made his lawyer's eyes widen in shock. No one could hear exactly what he said, but his expression told the story. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, suddenly pale. Across the room, Evan's mother tried to meet her son's eyes, but he never looked her way. The prosecutor began laying out the evidence. Photos, reports, timelines, all of it painted a chilling picture. The jurors looked uncomfortable. Each photo showed a small, quiet town changed forever. Every detail of what happened that day was worse than the last. People in the audience gasped, some even walked out. But Evan just sat there, tapping his fingers on the desk like a bored student waiting for class to end. Then the court heard the recording, the one taken from a store security camera near the shopping plaza. The video showed Evan and Mason leading little Eli by the hand. At first, it looked almost innocent, two older boys helping a lost child. But when the footage showed them turning down a dark alley, the room fell completely silent. The video cut off before the worst part, but everyone knew what came next. Mason's testimony came next. Wearing an oversized suit and trembling hands, he told the court that Evan had planned everything. He said Evan wanted to see how far they could go. Mason claimed he tried to stop him, that he only followed because he was scared. But when the prosecutor asked why he didn't run or call for help, Mason looked down and whispered, because he said he'd hurt me too. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled faster, flashes popped, and Evan laughed. That laugh echoed through the courtroom like a scream in a church. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. People in the gallery shouted, "Monster," and "Lock him up," as deputies rushed to restore calm. Evan's mother broke down completely, crying out his name, but he didn't react. He just smiled wider, as if the chaos around him proved he had already won something none of them could understand. When the judge called for a recess, the guards led Evan to a holding room behind the courtroom. There, he finally spoke. "They don't get it," he said, his voice flat. "I'm not like them." One of the guards asked what he meant. Evan looked up, eyes cold and serious, and said, "They think they can scare me. But I already know what happens next." He leaned back in his chair and smirked, the kind of smirk that made grown men uncomfortable. Outside, the media swarmed. Reporters asked how a boy so young could commit such a crime. Psychologists debated whether he was evil or simply broken. The town where it happened was drowning in grief. Parents refused to let their kids out of sight. And inside that courthouse, jurors wrestled with something no one wanted to face, that a child could understand what he did and still feel nothing. When the trial resumed, the prosecutor brought up Evan's notebook. Inside were more drawings, each one darker than the last. One page showed a small stick figure lying beside a river. Another showed a smiling face with the words, "He stopped crying." The room fell cold. Evan didn't deny making them. Instead, he shrugged and said, "It's just drawings." But the jury could see something in those pages, something deliberate, something planned. During closing arguments, Evan's lawyer begged the jury to see him as a child who didn't understand right from wrong. He talked about his broken home, his loneliness, his pain. But when it was Evan's turn to speak, he looked at the jury and said softly, "I knew what I did. I just wanted to see what it felt like." His voice didn't tremble. His face didn't change. He said it like he was describing what he had for lunch. The judge called for silence as the verdict was read. "Guilty," the foreman said. Gasps filled the room. Evan didn't blink. He turned toward his lawyer, smiled one last time, and whispered, "Told you I'd be fine." No one knew what he meant, until his lawyer explained that because of his age, Evan couldn't be sent to an adult prison. He would only stay in juvenile detention until 18. The crowd erupted in disbelief. Reporters shouted, flashbulbs popped, and outside the courthouse, people cried for justice. As the guards led Evan away, he looked back over his shoulder and said quietly, "I'll be back before you forget me." To be continued. The story of Evan Brooks became one of the most chilling reminders in American crime history, a story that blurred the line between innocence and evil. The image of a 12-year-old boy smiling in court while being sentenced for murder shocked an entire nation. People asked how someone so young could do something so dark, and feel nothing, even after his sentencing. Debates raged for years. Some said Evan was a victim of neglect and violence himself. Others believed he was proof that evil can exist at any age. His case changed how the justice system looked at young offenders, forcing lawmakers to ask painful questions about responsibility, punishment, and redemption. As the courtroom lights faded and the cameras stopped flashing, one thing remained clear: the world would never forget the boy who smiled in court, convinced he'd walk free. This is a true reminder that sometimes, the scariest monsters don't hide in the dark. They sit right in front of us, wearing the face of a child.